Hey everyone, good night. This is the Fit Philosopher King, and I'm gonna elaborate at some point on why that name. But for now, I want to focus on today's topic, which is gonna be spirituality. And spirituality, the best definition I've found, um, is that which refers to the intangible. So that's the spiritual realm, the things that I cannot touch. So I cannot touch faith, my thoughts, my beliefs, my emotions. Um, that is kind of that in that realm, the intangible realm. So in essence, almost any being is a spiritual being. Um, I have a set of belief systems. I have a set of priorities. I have my principles and values. And as I evolve as a human being, those things also shift. The same things that I value when I was a teenager and, going out and partying and um, getting involved in that lifestyle um, was what I valued. And today, um, at a later age, I value different things. Like I value hard work, I value sleep. Like I used to sacrifice sleep a lot when I was in my teenage years. So our values can also shift as we grow and as we mature. So it's not a stable thing either. Um, One of the things um, that I want to share about spirituality is it's a rude awakening and spiritual awakenings. So kind of like in that same note, where in my teenage years, my values were mostly of staying up late, partying, and um, kind of everything that revolved around that. Um, but that lifestyle tends to create a lot of deterioration, and it's not very fruitful. It's not productive, especially to the kind of like to the extent where I was at. And as I continued down that path, and I kind of also used as a benchmark, um, some of my friends from high school, and a lot of them started to having family and kids and had awesome jobs and had finished the university. Meanwhile, I was not doing much with my life. I, w- um, I was growing up and I kind of like took a rock star lifestyle where I was the drummer in a band. So I was mostly focusing on like the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But it didn't play out very well. Um, so eventually it did get to that point where um, I had kind of exhausted all the resources mentally, emotionally, financially, spiritually. And I kind of started to realize that the where that path led was not a place where I was happy with who I was. So that's when a rude awakening occurred, realizing that my holistic thinking, beliefs, principles, and values were not leading down the path that I thought it would. Like I thought, um, and this has kind of manifested throughout many times throughout my life, but kind of like setting this uh, destiny treadmill where I think, when once I get famous and am a rock star, I'm gonna be happy. Or when I get this house, I'm gonna be happy. Or when I get this amount of money, I'm gonna be happy. And that conditions my happiness. So at one point, one of my spiritual guides, I remember, posted on Facebook something like, happiness is difficult to find within oneself, but it cannot be found anywhere else. And I didn't quite understand um, what that meant in the past, but having worked with him gave me a very good idea of what that meant. So I'll expand on that. But um, the rude awakening is kind of necessary. Um, to some extent, is what allowed me to ask for help. Is what allowed me to seek for guidance. Um, because what I was doing was not working. So that's actually the first step for me, at least. And I used to think that um, doing some sort of substance would trigger this spiritual awakening, and that's completely false today, at least in my experience. Like, I don't think anyone needs to go on an ayahuasca trip to try to exhort by force this awareness or this spiritual awakening. If anything, I think it's counterproductive. I think there's other ways to achieve the same thing without having to seek outside myself. So the rude awakening is what began the path to understand spirituality, to understand how my um how I got where I got. And once I started to work on myself, and this was for a period of about 2 years, that I met with someone every single week in order to go over go over a process where I would analyze everything, um, to kind of give some idea of what was the most relevant. Is I started to dissect every situation in my life where, for example, I had a resentment, and I started to map out what my part in everything was. So I just started to write all the resentments and then wrote my part on it. I wrote how in certain situations I was fearful, so I acted out. I was angry, so I acted out. I was jealous, so I acted out. Um, and I stopped focusing at what others were doing or not doing, or because that's outside of my locus of control. And not only did I start dissecting my life that way, trying to identify what were my character defects, but I also started to understand what it is that I value. Aside from how I felt or what I thought, like, what do I value? Um, and kind of going and circling back to the other video, the chariot metaphor, kind of stepping away from my thoughts, um, or kind of analyzing my thoughts a little bit more, um, and guiding my thoughts and my emotion towards what were my actual principles and values. So today, for example, fitness is one of those values, and it has a holistic impact, right? Mind, body, and spirit. And I think everything is connected. So today, I try to the best of my ability to have a healthy lifestyle. Try to work out often, um, and this has a an impact on my biology as a human being. Like when I work out, I secrete hormones that are beneficial for my brain, for my body. So it is a positive and healthy thing, and it's something I value a lot. So that's part of the reason why the name, and I'll expand another part later, but or in another video. But yeah, so my principles and values started to shift. I started to understand, that I valued hard work, and how in the past I was in dissonance with these values, because to some extent I was looking for the easy path. I was looking to get, paid a lot to do very little, and that was not sustainable. So that led to certain situations in my professional path, but eventually I kind of calibrated, understood what was happening, and improved. And I continue to assess these situations, these behaviors, these results in order to maintain the trajectory of my life. So today I understand, I can practice principles such as discipline, honesty, humility, assertiveness, positivity. Like I can practice these principles, and in the same way, and I like this analogy a lot. Um, in the spiritual realm, if I practice these principles, it's as if I'm doing a rep. So whenever I'm honest, whenever I'm vulnerable, whenever obviously this needs to be put into context. Like it's very important whom my audience is, what the situation is. Um, but in the extent that I was able to achieve this, for example, with my spiritual guide, the more I started to truly know who I was. And there's a saying I really like: knowing others is wise, and knowing thyself is enlightenment. Now, I'm not saying I'm enlightened, um, but I'm definitely not in the dark place that I used to be. And as I started to again dissect my past and understanding how I was acting out, how I was being self-centered, how I was unable to consider other people's feelings and emotions and thoughts, etc., especially the people close to me, and how I could practice spiritual principles to improve my connections with them, with myself, you know. I started to things starting to improve. So um, Tesla, who was a very famous scientist, used to say that if you want to understand the universe, you need to think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And everything that exists is some manifestation of that. So I would say there's like an energetic um, manifestation of honesty, of discipline, of taking action. Um, in the same note, that there's a um, energetic manifestation from a person who's negative. It puts off a negative vibe. There's a reason, and it's observable. Um, so the vibe, I would say, is kind of like the holistic energy that we provide as we go through life. Um, so a thought can have a negative impact, and in terms of biology, the way that the human mind has developed throughout millions of years, or well, as a human, hundreds of thousands of years. The mind, at its in a primitive state, kind of still is unable to identify or differentiate what's imagined and reality. So, for example, if I think of a negative situation of something that could happen, my mind is going to start preparing for it. Um, so it'll start secreting cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and it'll start unplugging some systems so that it uses all the energy, um, to focus on the potential threat, even if there isn't. Even if there isn't, just by me having that thought, I'm triggering already this cascade or this domino effect that eventually starts to shut down systems. So, for example, if I'm stressed about something that's gonna happen in the next few days, even if it's not there, it's having an impact on my body. So there's I think it's Marcus Aurelius who says, "He who suffers before time suffers twice," and um, sometimes we suffer more in imagination than from what actually plays out. So, and this is part of the thing that I see currently affects a lot of us. Um, so circling back to the thought, a thought can cascade into having this level of impact where my breathing system changes. Like I'm going to breathe more superficially. My digestive system also kind of shuts down because all the energy is being pulled into focusing and try to figure out how to solve this potential threat. But it's a very primitive state to be in order to resolve situations in which the modern human being is at. Like we're in a different state. We're no longer being chased for the most part by lions in the savannah. That's not the case. But our our response to an email from a negative email is the almost the same. So that's part of the thing that a negative thought could have. Now, a positive thought could also have the opposite effect. It could release hormones that are positive, like um, let me look it up here real quick. Um, I'm gonna bring it up. So, like, okay, so we have dopamine, serotonin, um, oxytocin. Okay, so even thinking, for example, just to kind of like give a random example here, um, if you start to think about puppies and the smell and the aroma and hugging them, and it'll start, I'll start feeling a certain way, and it'll release the hormone of oxytocin. Um, it's the same as when I put myself in a situation where, for example, I hang out with my dogs. So that's one way. Um, then we have endorphins, where if I do some physical activity, it's one of the best ways to boost endorphins and dopamine. So, and that's those things stem from a thought, right, or an intention, and we are to some extent kind of like this. And there's already EMC square. formula where it kind of quantifies that mass equals energy. So we physically are energy. Everything that is manifested is energy. And circling back to Tesla, if you want to understand the universe, you need to think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. A thought has a certain energy associated to it. So it could physically manifest in one of these hormones, such as, as I'm mentioning, oxytocin, endorphins, dopamine. Now, if it's a negative emotion or a negative thought, it could be cortisol. And then it has a certain output. And there is a correlation with everything, right? So when I'm healthy, when I'm following a healthy, fit lifestyle, it has an impact on everything in my life. So that's part of the reason why it's um, on the name, because it is very important. So this is just to kind of like provide some context. But going into the spiritual awakening, I used to think that that it would be necessary for a certain context and ritual, or or maybe even a substance was necessary to trigger this, but that's not the case. So in terms of spiritual awakenings, in my experience, and to provide context, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do anything. I just eat food, drink water and beverages, but no alcohol or anything. And what I found is, um, there are several ways in which I can become aware of what it is that I need, or what is my next step to grow spiritually. And a guide is very useful. Like I wouldn't have been able to do this on my own. Like I needed someone that kind of served as a mirror and didn't have my ego, or wasn't it wasn't me, basically. Like I need someone else. So there's a concept, which is the Joe Harry window. I might dive into it later, but basically we do need for others we need others' feedback in order to have a holistic view of ourselves. Um, and that, at least from my experience, the truth. Like I need other people to tell me what they see that I'm not able to see, and that's how I get a much better sense of who I am. Now I have to be mindful, right, of who those people are, and um, also analyze and be self-critical about the feedback, and address it. I I've become aware of many things about myself, and there is a paradox here. The paradox is, how do I love and accept myself as I am, and also understand that there's still room for improvement? Um, and that paradox is something I'm okay with today. Like today, I understand much better who it is that I am, where it is that I'm going, what my principles and values are. I behave much more in alignment with them, and with the outcomes that I want in life. So as long as I'm doing what I'm doing, eventually I'm going to get to the places that I want to get. And I've done this many times. Um, so it's also about being grateful for where I am today, and understand that, it's like the stock market, right? As a person, we'll also have our times where I'm gonna put it in this terms, like increase in value and then decrease. And then we'll increase in value and decrease. Then we'll increase in value again as we expand the time horizon. The idea is because I also am a human being. I still sometimes act out. So I'm not perfect. I won't ever be perfect. But the more I practice spiritual principles, the more I strengthen the ability to practice those principles in more challenging situations. Just as in the same way, a person in the gym would add weight at a certain pace to the point where eventually, after years, they'll be able to lift weights that they didn't even think of. The same thing applies for spirituality. Like the more I practice discipline, the more I practice honesty, the more I practice forgiveness, these things, obviously everything within context, and also the more I apply boundaries, because being a spiritual being, I think, uh, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm $100 bill and that everyone's gonna like me. That's that would be an unrealistic expectation. Not everyone's gonna like me, and I'm totally okay with that. But today again, the idea is for me to grow continuously, and as long as I'm in that trajectory, and I keep doing what I'm doing, you know, meeting with a spiritual guide, it could be someone that you value who how they behave in life. Um, someone who gives you a good vibe, someone who's going to be honest, someone who will point you in the right direction, whether you want to hear it or not. um, and then having the humility to listen and then start working on yourself. It doesn't have to be um, someone who spent um, 7 years in a cave, and that's not how enlightenment or a spiritual awakening is achieved, at least in my experience. And that's one of the fallacies, I would say, that false expectations I had. Like I thought that I had to completely detach from the material world and that I had to meditate endlessly. And I don't think that that's the case today. That's extremist, I would say. There's, you know, normal people who are very good teachers. Like everyone can be my teacher in some way, shape, or form. So I can learn from everyone. But where I'm getting with this is it is important to at least have a guide, in a pillar of life. Find someone who has what you want and then reverse engineer what it is that they're doing. Now, I try to ideally have those references with people who have the results that I want, right? Because it's very easy for me to say a lot of stuff, but I don't have the outcomes myself. So it removes from the wisdom of it. So the best thing, and also kind of like what I've noticed recently, I guess, is the um, what's the term? Competence. That's the word I'm looking. Um, so the people who have had to kind of struggle but maintain, because very likely the person that you'll meet, for example, if it's someone that wants to start a business, probably they failed more times than what the student has even tried. That's almost a universal principle, and there is a quote about it. But competence is very important, and competence is mostly um, seen through the person's results, and that's very important. Like someone can be very good at speech, but and I'll include myself. I think at times I'm able to communicate very clearly, um, and I have an idea of what it is that I need to do, and I may not do it to the extent that I probably could. So I'm not. What I'm saying with this is probably look for the most competent person in whatever skill or whatever aspect or pillar of life it is you'd like to improve, and see if they'd be willing to help. See if they would be willing to guide you, and maybe just even establish a like a friendship, and um, it'll come by as a secondary, um, like the cherry on top. But yeah, competence is very important, and incompetence is it's gonna set us back a lot. Whether that's in a financial aspect, whether that's an emotional aspect, it's gonna there's gonna we're it's gonna lead to a lot of lost time, and time is extremely valuable. Um, so find people that are competent, and again, not because of what they say, but because of the results they have. Now, there's some isolated events. Not everyone. So there's an element of luck in business. There is an element of luck as well. So it may be a combination of both, right? But generally speaking, someone who is disciplined and consistent and resilient will likely, independent of luck, have kind of surpassed a lot of the obstacles that prevented them from achieving their goal. But it's like other people share. It's about the person who you become in that process that matters the most, rather than the outputs. The outputs ideally will come, and it's important to understand how times change and what's relevant and what's in demand and things like that. But as long as constant calibration is being done and the um, person that you're meant to become through that process is consistently worked on, eventually the results will come. So, in terms of spiritual awakening, I think there's various types. So, once there's a root awakening where we understand that we don't know it all, we need help from others, and we are flawed, etc., and that I'm not a victim of the world, and that I have to take responsibility of everything that happens in my life, things will start to change. And once I assess, what my character defects are, and I look into where my opportunities are. So in this situation where I was jealous, I can practice empathy, or I can practice faith. I can practice some principle that will help me counteract that character defect. Now, it's very easy and there's like levels to it. Like it's very easy to be tolerant of a stranger at times. It's easier to be tolerant of a stranger than it is to be tolerant with someone who, for example, could be a family relative and just annoys us, extremely annoys us. So practicing tolerance, practicing serenity, and not responding, not reacting to the person It's far more difficult and challenging in situations where we feel very strongly to act out. And it's very easy to practice it with a stranger because we're just gonna see them for one day and or a few minutes and then that's it. But practicing that with someone who we live with or constantly meet, it that's where the spiritual work is. Like I don't think going into a cave is actually, now to some extent it will help, it could help, but at some point it becomes escapism, and I'm escaping the things that need to deal with, and whatever that is, like whatever that is. Um, but in the day to day, I get to practice these principles. I get to wake up. I get to be thankful that I'm alive. I get to spend some time with my dogs. I get to go to work, be a productive member, and I also have to deal with troubles. So this is where my task is. And there's a saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So to some extent, nothing changes, but everything changes. There's a subtle difference. And again, it's in that person that we become when we do these things. And in my experience, very few people take the time, the effort to take that personal inventory and then figure out what principles or values they can work on. And sometimes we'll need to detach from our thoughts and feelings to highlight what our true values are, what our soul tells us our principles and values are. Because again, the biology of our mind is quite primitive and associated to the emotional component. Um, it kind of blinds us at times from the subtleties of what's that we value. So that's important. Um, so spiritual awakening is, I used to think that it was that there was gonna be a point through through which I would eventually find unlimited serenity, peace, tranquility, and I would be one with the universe, and I would be this total ball of bliss. And I think that's an unrealistic expectation. I think that's very extremist as well. Today I think the more I understand myself and who I am as a human being, each one of us, the more we're lightening up. Um, so a spiritual awakening is when it could be. There's a couple of things that come to mind first. So first, whenever I become aware of a character defect and I work on it, like if I know I tend to get angry, act out, and behave or say things that are hurtful, and I'm aware of it and I stop doing it, that's a spiritual awakening. It's not this extremely elaborate, mystical, woo woo wee woo stuff. That's not it. It's very simple. And the simplest it is, the more spiritual it is. If I think I'm gonna have this vision of whatever, highly unlikely. The more, like in my experience, the times that I've awakened the most have been when um, I've kind of realized I've gone, I've shed some light in the darkness, and there's an important aspect here, and it's the wisdom to know the difference. So there's a prayer, the Serenity Prayer, that says, "God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." And the wisdom to know the difference is very important because there are, in cases, for example, emotions that are given a negative connotation, but emotions are there just to tell me something. Kind of like the light on the dashboard of a car. They're telling me if the tires are getting flat, if the car needs an oil change, if they're there to try to tell me something. But how I respond is where my power is. So if in a situation I feel angry, usually anger is a symptom of an injustice. And I can get angry and I can, curse at the world and kick some computers and, curse at people, but that's not going to fix anything. If anything, it's going to make everything worse. But if I understand that, that there may be an injustice and that I need to assess the situation and respond, the output is usually much different. Like I'm able to get a more productive solution when I understand what the feeling is trying to tell me. And in some extent, for example, jealousy. Like jealousy might be a light to where it is that I want to go myself. So it can actually be a positive thing. It's a wisdom to know the difference. How I respond and what it is that it's trying to tell me. Am I able to learn that lesson? There's a friend of mine who is one of my guides, one of, and he was in a prison in Hawaii, and he saw on the wall something that said, "In life, there's three points. Number one, there are no mistakes, only lessons. Point number two, the lessons will repeat themselves until learned. And point number three, we learn through pain." Pain is a very important component to spiritual awakenings. And there is a tendency of us to run away from pain. But the answer is not running away. The answer is going through it, understanding what the pain is, what it's trying to teach me. And if I'm able to learn the lesson, I'm able to transcend whatever it is that's creating that block. So pain today is an emotion that I have a completely different relationship with today. Like I don't run away from pain anymore, or at least I don't do it as often, or is in much, it's in greater frequency. But pain is a very important aspect in the process of evolution. Pain can be can be, and I'm trying to think of there's like a quote. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's in the book Power versus Force, but it's something under the lines of pain is the cornerstone of evolution. So yeah, pain is actually something that today allows me to understand life, myself, in a different way. Now, part of a spiritual awakening is also understanding that we can partake in the human experience. Um, Thinking about like the mystic, exclusive approach to spirituality, um, I think it's overrated. I think again, spirituality is a very simple thing. Um, it's about defining my principles, my values, to a great extent. Also processing trauma and a few other things. But through that is that serenity comes through. And circling back to the point of seek nothing outside yourself, obviously it's not an absolute truth. Like I need to drink water, I need to eat food, or I'm gonna die. But in the sense that I have everything I need right here, right now. And I don't need anything outside of myself. Like I don't need any substance. I don't need anything to figure out what it is that's going on with me. If anything, the only thing that will do is it might shed some forced visibility, but if nothing is done afterwards, nothing is going to change. Because through my 15-year time in self improvement, I realize that I can intellectually know what it is that I need to do. Like I can intellectually know I need to work out, I need to be disciplined at work, I need to help others, I need to do um, a lot of things. But if I don't do them, it doesn't matter how much awareness I have. So there's things that I can do um, without the need of something outside myself. And I'll give a couple more examples. So in terms of peace and tranquility or entertainment or whatever, some people resort to substances. And peace and tranquility and these things can be cultivated organically. They don't have to be synthesized or they don't have to come from an outside um, force. But it requires effort. So I practice a lot of physical fitness disciplines in my life. Like I do MMA, jiu-jitsu, CrossFit, gym. I like to keep it um, varied. And I also do yoga, which kind of helps in various ways. It gives me some meditation techniques. Um, it has the physical component to it. And there's been times where I've done yoga where the last after I finish, I get the results of having overpassed that initial resistance. Like it's usually challenging to choose to be productive versus watch YouTube, to work out versus going into social media. It's uh it's it's a very synthesized way, but and it's not the absolute truth, but in most cases, if not almost all, I would say is constantly here now. It's about immediate gratification versus long-term gratification. So usually there's resistance towards doing what's best for me right here, right now. And whatever that may be, that may be sitting down and doing some homework, that may be waking up early to work out, that may be whatever that is. There's going to be some resistance versus the long term um, component. So if I do get past, and I can be strategic and tactical about it, like if I have to wake up early tomorrow to work out, probably gonna set my shoes, my um, whatever equipment I need, so that it there's less resistance when I wake up to do these things. Like I can be more strategic about it. And long term, after, and this is one of the kind of like formulas that one of my spiritual guides um, used to say, was a way in which he identified if something was the universe. Like, when I do a brief parenthesis here, I'm going to talk about higher power. So a higher power, it could be God. I saw in a movie that said God is love. It could be the universe, the force, as in um, Star Wars, which I think is probably, for me at least, the most closely related to my personal beliefs. Um, the force, I think it's pretty accurate. Um, but if I want to understand what this power's will for me is, and or what's best for me, whatever you want, however you want to perceive it, is if I do this and I get immediate gratification, but afterwards I feel like shit, that's very likely something that's long term and not in alignment with that higher power or God or universe's intention or purpose for me. If there's something that I do that initially I have some level of resistance, but after I do it, I get the long term gratification, that is very likely my higher powers or God or the universe or whatever you want to call it will for me. And whether that's saving, whether that's investing, whether that's whatever it is. And there's a few obviously nuances to that, but generally speaking, that is a very simple formula to understand what's best for me. And so spiritual awakenings, that would be one of them. Becoming aware of character defects and then changing. Becoming aware intellectually doesn't do anything. So changing, that's where the spiritual awakening is. Changing my ways, changing my attitudes, changing my beliefs. And sometimes I'm able to achieve that by pain. Like if I have a character defect that's causing enough pain, it's far more likely that I will change and I will do something different. So pain to me is actually a positive thing because it helps me become a better person. Um, so a spiritual awakening as well is just the holistic output of having worked on oneself and examined life. Um, and let me see, who was it that says examined life? Suffer philosopher quote. Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. So that's what I was mentioning earlier about dissecting and analyzing maybe like the first 24 years of my life. And so that's um, what allowed me eventually to kind of understand the nature of where I was in life and where I wanted to go. And today it's as if I'm navigating a ship, and that ship was headed towards the rocks. And that ship was about to just collapse and crack and be done with. And by understanding how to operate a ship and moving some of the cables and understanding the references of the sky and certain things, I'm able to navigate much more efficiently and competently towards my objectives. So that's the important part about the competence part. Like, um, definitely a spiritual guide should be someone who's competent, who has the results that you want. And I think from spiritual awakening, there's also, I guess, a rejoice, you know, a rejoice and happiness and gratitude. I think gratitude, it's probably the universal symptom of someone who's spiritually awakened. Um, to quote. Okay, and it's a philosopher as well, Cicero. Um, let me see, who was Cicero? Yeah, what's Roman here? So Cicero used to say that gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all others. And that kind of aligns with my experience. Like being grateful of my character defects is one of the things that, to some extent, keep me humble. Um, it keeps my feet on the ground. I'm also grateful for the challenges. There's a very good quote from a movie. Let me look it up here real quick. It's from a movie. I think I found it. It says, okay, I asked for strength and God gave me difficulties to make me strong. I asked for wisdom and God gave me problems to solve. I asked for courage and God gave me dangers to overcome. I asked for love and God gave me troubled people to help. My prayers were answered. And I think this is extremely important, um, because today I am grateful for everything. I am grateful for the difficulties as they make me strong. I'm grateful for the problems as they help me, um, let's say, somewhat wise, at least a little bit wiser. Um, the dangers to overcome. So it allows me the opportunity to practice courage and then helping others. I think these are very important things as well in terms of, for example, just prayer and meditation, because we tend to think, and that's one of the things I've learned. Like, I think God answers prayers in a in an experience kind of way, and sometimes the words do come out through a person or the answer, or but most of the time it works as in this prayer. Like if I ask for strength, God give me difficulties to make me strong. So at times I'm getting what I wanted, but I reject it and I'm ungrateful. But it is and this is one of my personal beliefs, that everything that's happening right here, right now, it's what's best for my spiritual growth. whatever that is. Like there's a lesson for me here that I need to learn from. So that's one of my personal beliefs, but rejoicing in that is also important. And in a future video, I'm probably gonna do a little bit more about like the higher power or the force or whatever you want to call it, um, and the triangle of self obsession concept. But for now, uh, a spiritual awakening can be very subjective. But generally speaking, the patterns that I've seen is that the person is more serene. They'll be able to address situations that are confusing or baffling or conflicting in a tranquil way, in a very mild manner. Not always. Like there's times in which a very strong, assertive demeanor is necessary. But I would say those are very rare and far in between. But that's usually the case, at least from what I've seen. And again, it's not this complicated, mystical, have going to the Tibetan mountains to meet the wise person who's lived there secluded for years to get a word of wisdom. I don't think that's the case. Like those things are nice to have. And at some level, I guess they do have some value, but it's not necessary. Like we have everything we need right here, right now, to improve spiritually, to grow spiritually. It's not rocket science. It's not. Um, it's not rocket surgery. It's not brain science type of deal. So so yeah, um, everything's gonna be okay. Have a good night, everyone.